The chandeliers flickered like nervous stars above a ballroom silenced by disbelief. Victoria Reynolds, draped in layers of pearl-stitched silk, stood frozen at the altar, her gloved hand still clenched in Alexander Montgomery's as if holding on to the last second of a perfectly curated life. Then, a voice, small, certain, cut through the velvet quiet. "We need to speak with Mr. Montgomery," said a girl, no older than 10, holding a folder against her chest like a shield. Everyone turned. Two identical girls in matching navy blue dresses stood at the end of the aisle. Behind them, a woman in a catering uniform panted breathlessly, unable to stop what had already begun. Olivia stepped forward. "It won't take long. We just need to show him something." Victoria gasped. Eleanor Montgomery whispered something sharp to a guard. "But Alexander." Alexander stared. The girl's eyes. His eyes. The Montgomery blue. The same look he'd seen in the mirror for decades and now stared back from two uninvited faces that shattered everything he thought he knew. Emma held out the folder. "We believe you're our dad." The bride fainted. And the world, built by deals and deception, began to crumble with one whispered truth. The chandelier above shimmered like a frozen constellation, its cold light spilling across rows of high society elites wrapped in silk and ego. A string quartet murmured in the corner, their notes drowned by the deafening silence that fell the instant the twin girls stepped onto the aisle. 10 years old. Identical down to the shade of chestnut hair and the unwavering steel in their blue eyes, eyes that didn't belong to either side of the wedding party. Emma held the folder close to her chest. Olivia's voice was small, but it cracked the ceremony like a lightning strike. "We need to speak to Mr. Montgomery." The officiant froze. So did Alexander Montgomery. 35. Power tailored. 1,000 whispers buried in that name. Groom of the day. Future of the dynasty. He looked down the aisle, toward the uninvited children standing defiant beneath chandeliers bought with old money. The bride, Victoria, turned pale. Her perfectly manicured fingers crushed the bouquet of imported peonies. A murmur rippled through the ballroom. And then silence again. Emma opened the folder. Inside, lab reports, photos, and a cover page that read, "Paternity match, 99.998%. Alexander's hands twitched at his sides. Eleanor Montgomery's gasp shattered the quiet like glass. "You're our dad," Olivia said. Gasps. Phones out. Cameras up. Victoria dropped her bouquet. Not on purpose. Flashbulbs burst like gunfire. "Is this some kind of joke?" Victoria hissed. But Alexander had already knelt. The girls stared at him like he wasn't a stranger. Like he was a memory they had finally caught up to. "What's your mother's name?" he whispered, his voice already knowing. "Dr. Sophia Carter," Emma said. And just like that, the world Alexander had curated collapsed. 10 minutes later, Victoria was gone. The press was swarming. His mother was spitting hushed orders at the security team. But Alexander couldn't hear any of it. He just kept looking at the twins. The shape of their faces. The soft freckle beneath Emma's left eye, the exact one he saw in old baby photos of himself. The only person not speaking was Alexander. Because he already knew. He turned to the crowd of gawking socialites, swallowed his panic, and said quietly, "The wedding is postponed." Daniel, his best man, stepped beside him, whispering, "You okay?" "No," Alexander replied. But he looked at the girls again. And added, "I think I'm finally awake." The ballroom faded behind him like a mirage as Alexander stepped into the private antechamber, heart pounding, mind still reeling. Victoria's shout still echoed in his ears, accusatory, brittle, the unraveling threads of a life he'd spent years curating. The twins' words rang louder. "We believe you're our father." That sentence shattered something inside him, something long locked away. He slumped into the leather chair, rubbing his temples as Daniel entered, closing the door behind him. "They look like you, Alex," he said quietly. "Down to the eyes." That night, Alexander couldn't sleep. He stared at the faded photograph the girls had handed him. Sophia's eyes looked back at him from their faces. Sophia. The woman he had once believed he would marry. The one his mother deemed unworthy. The one who vanished without warning a decade ago. But now he knew, she didn't vanish. She was erased. The next morning, Alexander's penthouse felt emptier than ever. He walked past glass walls and steel fixtures that once screamed success but now felt sterile. On the kitchen counter, he placed the girl's folder beside a mug of untouched coffee. DNA reports. Medical charts. A picture drawn by one of the girls, a family of 3 under a crooked sun, the father's hair unmistakably his. He called his assistant. "Get me everything on Sophia Carter." 2 hours later, her life was laid out before him in spreadsheets and clippings. Head of pediatrics at Boston General. Award-winning researcher. Single mother. No known spouse. A single line in a dated hospital newsletter made him pause. Dr. Carter accepted the position while raising twins born during her residency. His breath caught. He booked a flight to Boston that afternoon. The hospital hall smelled like antiseptic and old memories. As he waited outside the pediatric wing, Alexander rehearsed what he might say. "I'm sorry. I didn't know. I should have found you." But what words could rebuild a decade in a single breath? Sophia appeared down the hall, coat swinging, clipboard in hand. She hadn't changed, older, sharper, even more beautiful in her determined stride. When she saw him, she froze. "Alexander?" "Hi," he said softly. "I saw them." Her eyes flickered with a mix of dread and defiance. "Then you know. They're mine." She hesitated only a moment. "Yes." The silence between them swelled. "I tried to find you," she said finally. "Your mother intercepted everything." He flinched. "I didn't know. I swear. I raised them alone, Alexander. Not because I wanted to, because I had to." "I believe you," he said, stepping closer. "And I want to know them." Sophia's face was unreadable. "You don't get to just step in after 10 years. I know. But I have to try." Back in New York, the boardroom felt colder. His father's voice haunted him, legacy, empire, control. But those words meant less now. That evening, he opened an old wooden box from his mother's things. Inside, a sonogram with 2 heartbeats. A post-it in her handwriting, "They didn't tell you. But I knew." He stared at it until morning. At the hospital, Sophia watched from her office window as her daughters played in the courtyard. She whispered to herself, "Why now?" She knew the answer. The truth has its own clock. And sometimes, children are the only ones brave enough to start it ticking again. Meanwhile, Eleanor Montgomery sat in her estate, reading an email flagged, "Urgent, Plaza Wedding Incident." A PR disaster, her assistant had called it. Eleanor called it fate. She sipped her tea with trembling hands and whispered, "The past always finds its way home." And it had just begun. The air in the Plaza Hotel's library was dense with the scent of old wood, fresh roses, and something far more volatile, unspoken truths. Alexander stood motionless, the girl's DNA folder open in his trembling hands. Across from him, Eleanor Montgomery sat ramrod straight, her pearls unmoved, her expression carefully blank. "They have your eyes," she said flatly, as though that observation could be excised from the whirlwind of what had just happened. Outside the heavy doors, the murmurs of guests still swirled, gossip blooming like wildfire beneath crystal chandeliers. Inside, time slowed. "Tell me what you did," Alexander said at last. 10 years ago. Tell me why I never knew about them." Eleanor didn't flinch. "Because you had a future to protect. A name. A company. And she was never going to be part of it. She had a name too. Sophia. She was brilliant. And she was carrying my daughters. I did what was necessary, Eleanor said quietly. You were too young, too impressionable. She would have dragged you down. You mean she loved me, Alexander corrected. And you buried that. You stole a decade of my life. Of their lives. Eleanor stood then, suddenly weary. What's done is done. Handle it with dignity. He looked at her like she was a stranger. You don't get to advise me anymore. Across town, in a modest pediatric wing of Mass General, Sophia Carter stood frozen over a file, the echo of Claire's voice still ringing in her ears. They did it, Soph, her sister had said. They found him. They went to the wedding. Sophia felt the ground beneath her tilt, not from fear, but from fury and heartbreak so old it had calluses. She had spent a decade crafting a fortress around her daughters, stable, ethical, loving. And now, in one public act, they had exposed themselves to the very world that once deemed their mother unworthy. A nurse knocked gently. Dr. Carter. Patient in room 5 just coded. The crisis snapped her back into function. I'm on it, she said, but her fingers trembled as she reached for the stethoscope. In her pocket was the note Olivia had left, folded with precision. We have to know. He might not want us. But we have to try. Meanwhile, Alexander's fiancée, former fiancé now, sat alone in the bridal suite, mascara streaked down porcelain cheeks. Victoria Reynolds had thrown her veil into the sink and was watching it drown when her mother entered, aghast. They can't just show up and ruin everything. But Victoria wasn't thinking about the scandal anymore. She was thinking about the look in Alexander's eyes. The one she'd never seen before. Not for her. Across from her reflection, she whispered bitterly, I was never going to be his family. Back at the mansion, Alexander called Daniel, his best friend and lawyer. Find Sophia Carter, he said, voice raw. Tell her I need to speak with her. Today. Tonight. Now. Daniel hesitated. Do you think she'll want to hear from you? She might not. But I owe her more than silence. I owe her everything. By midnight, Claire had managed to convince Sophia to pick up. Alexander didn't wait. He drove through the snow-blanketed avenues of Boston like a man trying to outrun time. At the hospital's back entrance, she was already there, coat tight around her, hair pulled into the same messy bun she wore in college when they studied together under cafeteria fluorescents. They stared at each other for the first time in over a decade. I didn't know, he said. I did, she replied. I would have come. I tried. I wrote. I called. Your mother intercepted everything. A pause. Wind howled through the alley between them. Then, they look like you, he whispered. And they act like you, she replied. Neither of them moved. You said once that our story wasn't over, he added softly. And I believed that. Until you disappeared. I didn't disappear, Sophia said, eyes sharp. I was erased. Something in him cracked then, not a dramatic collapse, but a silent, soul-deep fracture. Can I see them again? Not yet, Sophia said, but her voice faltered. Then let me earn it. Let me start with you. She didn't answer. But she didn't walk away either. And in the distance, a city glittered in silence, unaware that 2 lives, 3, maybe 5, had just shifted on their axis. The next morning dawned quietly, as if the city itself held its breath. Snow still clung to rooftops, but the storm had passed. Alexander stood outside Sophia's brownstone in Boston, holding nothing but a worn leather notebook and a navy scarf he remembered she once left in his apartment, years ago. He didn't know why he kept it. He just did. When the door opened, Olivia was the one who met him, not with fear or hesitation, but with a gaze too steady for her age. "She's making tea," the girl said softly. "But she doesn't want to cry in front of you, so you might want to wait a minute." He almost smiled. "That's fair." Emma appeared behind her sister, holding a book. "You were in one of Mom's old pictures. We thought maybe you were made up." "I thought about her every day," he said truthfully. "Then why didn't you come?" she asked, not with anger, just pure childlike confusion. "Because I didn't know you existed," he replied, kneeling. "And I'm so sorry I wasn't there to see you grow up." Behind them, Sophia leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, not to shield herself anymore, but to hold back the wave of everything. She had watched the way Alexander looked at the girls. There was no pretending in his eyes. No performance. Just something raw and wide open. Later that afternoon, over mugs of tea and cautious conversation, Olivia drew diagrams on napkins of how DNA inheritance worked. Emma read aloud a paragraph from the journal she'd kept for years. "I wonder if my dad has freckles like mine." He did. And when they laughed together, for the first time as a family, it didn't feel like a reunion. It felt like a beginning. That weekend, Sophia agreed to let the girls visit New York. "Just for a few days," she said. "Just to see." But when they walked into Alexander's apartment, once sterile, marble, and curated, they found a living room filled with books about space, music sheets, puzzles, and 2 small beds with matching comforters. "You prepared this before I said yes," Sophia noted later that night. "I hoped," he admitted. And when she finally smiled, soft, tired, real, it wasn't the smile of the woman he lost. It was the smile of the woman she had become. The following week, a hearing was held behind closed doors. With Sophia's approval and testimony from Claire, Daniel, and even Eleanor, who had quietly, tremblingly confessed her interference, the court granted shared legal guardianship. But the judge said something as she signed the order that stayed with them all. "This isn't a legal reunion. It's a human one. Handle it with grace." And they did. In the months that followed, Alexander became something new, not just a father, but a present one. He learned how to braid hair badly, how to pack school lunches without forgetting the napkin notes, how to sit through science fairs and piano recitals with tears in his eyes. Sophia didn't forget the past. But she allowed the present to soften its grip. Eleanor, surprisingly, began visiting often. She baked. She played chess with Olivia. She took Emma to classical concerts. And she apologized, not just once, but over time, in the slow language of actions that children understood better than words. Then came spring. A quiet ceremony in a garden courtyard. No press. No ballroom. Just Emma and Olivia walking their mother down the aisle, holding her hands like they had always been hers, and now, his too. Alexander waited at the altar, not with a diamond, but with the same sapphire stone he once saw Sophia wear as a pendant, saying, "I want us to build this slowly. Honestly. Fully." And when they exchanged vows, Emma whispered to Olivia, "See? We told you it would work." And it had. Not because they were perfect. But because they finally told the truth. Together. And the story that had once shattered in silence was now stitched together, with forgiveness, with family, with 2 brave little girls who rewrote what, happily ever after, truly meant.